One of the things that I showed you earlier is this directory of Azure services and showed you the compute category of the directory of Azure services that we have. And you can see that they're quite a lot. There's virtual machines, there's containers, and there's app services, and there's batch services. And a lot of that we're not going to cover in this course. We can have conversations about them. If you have questions or anything that you want to clarify, we can have questions. So talk about virtual machines in Azure. One of the first things that I talk about is the four key decisions when deploying VMs in Azure. That's how I put it. And I actually restructured the slide to talk about this. And four key decisions in VM deployment. Key decision number one is the decision about the image. That's the first key decision that we need to make when deploying virtual machines in Azure or in VM deployment in Azure. Decision number one is around the image. I'll show you what I mean. If I go to the Azure portal right now, and if I go to let's go for create a resource, and I'll create a virtual machine. And on this one, if I go to under here, you have the option to select an image. Of course, we select a subscription, we select our resource group, but we can select our image over here. And you can see it gives me a list of images. And if I go browse, I can see all the other image options that I can select. And there are three main options that we have when it comes to the image of what we're doing. Option number one is a Microsoft provided images. That's the first option that we have whenever we're choosing which image or whenever we're deploying virtual machines in Azure. Microsoft provided images. And Microsoft provided images is not just talking about Windows, because there are Windows images in Azure that are not provided by Microsoft. There are Linux images in Azure that are provided by Microsoft. So here's my nice diagram on examples of Microsoft images that are available. So let's go here. You just see this, and if I drag these over to the side. So Microsoft provided images can deploy like the native Windows that you've seen earlier. You know, server. You can also deploy Windows that's prepackaged with certain applications. So you could deploy, for example, SQL Server. What that means is going to deploy a virtual machine that not only has Windows but has SQL Server already pre-installed. You can deploy, for example, Visual Studio, which has Windows installed, different versions of Windows, but then has Visual Studio installed on top of that. So, for example, if I go back to my Azure portal over here, and if I search in here, if I search for Visual Studio, and you can see I can deploy Visual Studio 2019 Community on Windows 10, Visual Studio 2019 Enterprise on Windows 10, and on and on and on. If I search SQL Server, I have SQL Server Express on Windows Server 2016, so SQL Server 2016 Enterprise on Windows Server 2016, and on and on. So these are prepackaged images that already have this certain applications already installed on them. If I go back to here, there are certain images also that exist that are provided by Microsoft that are not running Windows. So for example, if I go back to this one, so the best way to show you that one is to just go to the Azure Marketplace. And in the Azure Marketplace, if I search for Linux, for example, come on. So, oh, search for Linux. There we go. And if I change the publisher to Microsoft, you can see that the Linux images provided. You can see the publisher. Let me maximize that so you can see that. You can see the publisher here. This is published by Microsoft, and that means it's maintained by Microsoft. Microsoft makes sure it's up to date. So this is SQL Server on Red Hat Linux. This is Microsoft Machine Learning Server on CentOS Linux. Um, SQL Server on SUSE Linux, and on and on. So this Jenkins on Ubuntu Linux, and on and on. So there are Linux images that are prepackaged but provided by Microsoft, but you have an option to do that. So you say, why are you talking about all of this, David? Because it's important to also recognize when you talk about billing and money and all that stuff. So for example, if you deploy Windows, this Windows, for example, Microsoft will charge you for the cost of the virtual machine that you're deploying, but they will also charge you for the cost of that, that operating system license. If you have an on-premises license, you could enable something called hybrid benefit, and then Microsoft could remove and not charge you for the cost of the license, but they will expect you to activate your license that you already have after you've deployed the virtual machine. If you're deploying something like SQL Server, let's say you're deploying a prepackaged SQL Server Express that doesn't cost anything, they will charge you for the cost of running the VM, the cost of the Windows operating system license, but because SQL Server is free, that's free. But let's say you're running SQL Server Enterprise, you're deploying an image that has that involved, they will also charge you for this. Except again, you have a hybrid benefit where you could activate your own solution and whatever, and you could do that. It's the same for certain versions of Visual Studio that are prepackaged. So just be aware that whatever image that you deploy, if it's Microsoft provided, also pay attention. You're going to be charged for just the cost of the VM, the cost of the operating system, and also including the cost of the application that's prepackaged on top of that. But that's the very first option, Microsoft provided images. Microsoft also do a very good job of keeping these images up to date. They do a very great job of that.
I've got a question around that.
Yes.
The licensing of that. What if you've got, say you're doing development and test work, and you've got, MSDN Visual Studio licenses?
Yes.
Does that have any impact on the potential cost of licensing for things like, the license for Windows in a Azure VM or SQL Server that comes with a prepackaged image?
Yes, it can is the answer to that, but you need to select the option when you're doing the deployment. So for example, I want to do a deployment here, right? If I cancel this and I go back to the screen, if I just go through this deployment like this way, I'll get charged for, even though I have MSDN license for Windows. But you see this option over here where it says already have a Windows license. I have to specifically choose yes, and then I have to confirm, in which case I will need to activate that afterwards. But I need to specify that. If I do not tick this, and you say, how do you know that if I do not tick this? So for example, I want to show you something. If I tick no to that, and if I go on the size, and it's going to show me the actual cost. So for example, this is going to cost me 115 in a month, right? For D2SV3, that's going to cost me 115 in a month. So what I'm going to do is if I go back here and I hope that this does that and I confirm that. And if I go back to change the size, let's see if that has an impact. And you can see that D2SV3 is now 64 because I selected that option.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you have to, so it can, but you have to specify that you have the license before you do that. But before you do the deployment, and then they're not going to charge you for that. Otherwise, they're going to just, by default, it's going to assume that you want to just pay for everything as you're deploying it.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Okay, so that's Microsoft provided images. What other option do you have? The other option that you have are third-party provided images. So these are not images that are created or provided by Microsoft. They are provided by third-party providers, Microsoft partners. I'm a fan of Sophos. For example, you can get like the Sophos XG firewall, one in Azure. So it already has the Sophos firewall image already prepackaged into that. You have like SUSE Linux, Red Hat Linux, Kali Linux, all kinds of third-party images, lots of them. Actually, there are third-party images that exist in Azure that are Windows. For example, I'll show you an example. If I go to the Azure Marketplace over here, and if I go change this and I go search for CIS, and there's such there, so let's change that to partners. Thanks very much. That was what I was missing. So I changed that to partners and that Windows, and you can see that there are certain Windows images. So this is a CIS added image provided by CIS, not provided by Microsoft, but it's the same Windows license. So you pay for the Windows license, but you also pay for the service that CIS are offering to you, which is they've added this image. So you may find out that the cost is a bit different from if you just deploy the Microsoft provided ones. So, and you can see the CIS Microsoft Windows Server benchmark adding images and all that stuff. So there are third-party images that are Microsoft software that they just provide additional services to you, and then they charge you for the cost of the license and plus for the cost of the service that they've provided as part of deploying that image. Of course, they have a relationship with Microsoft to do like redistribution or whatever. So, but just be aware of that there are third-party images that exist both for Linux and for Windows that are provided by third party. Maybe if you have like a firewall that you use or whatever they use, those images probably already exist on Azure. The main thing when it comes to third party images is the options for payment for them. Because you can either have two options. You can either do a pay as you go option or a bring your own license option. And the classic one that I'm very familiar with that I can speak on is, for example, the Sophos XG firewall. So if I use Sophos XG firewall and I'm deploying it, it's going to ask me, actually, let me see if I can go, if let's go create a resource and let's go change this to Sophos. And if I click on the Sophos XG firewall and if I go to create, and I'll just run through this because I want to show you like the main part I want to show you. Sophos XG01 password. Oh, messed this one up. Azure, so resource group, create new, Sophos LG, UK South. And if I click OK, the main part I want to show you is this. Because you have two options when it comes to license. For many third-party solutions, you see that option. Either pay as you go or bring your own license. If you select pay as you go, what that means is Microsoft, when you're paying Microsoft, you pay Microsoft for the cost of running the VM. You also pay to Microsoft the cost of the Sophos license. Microsoft will collect both of those. That's usually more expensive than the other option, which is a bring your own license, which is you go to Sophos directly or whatever third party you're dealing with, you go to them directly, you buy a license from them, in which case Microsoft are only going to charge you for the cost of running the virtual machine. You go to the third party provider, you purchase a license from them, and then you activate that license afterwards. So Microsoft, and then usually the third party provider will give it to you cheaper because they want you to have a relationship with them and all that stuff. But just be aware of that whenever you're deploying third party images. So you can either have pay as you go or bring your own license. If you select bring your own license, it's gonna Microsoft is only gonna charge you for the cost of the VM, and then you go to go buy a license from the third party provider. Select pay as you go, you pay Microsoft for everything. Let's move on very quickly. So the other option, which is what I'll show you like a demo of, are customer provided images, your own custom images. You could build your own custom images either on premises, on Hyper-V or whatever, build the images and then bring them into Azure. Or you could actually just build a virtual machine in Azure, put your customizations on it, and then you do that. Why do organizations want to do that? So for example, I showed you like the instance of like a CIS addend image, which is a third-party provided image. So maybe what you have as an organization is you have certain security hardening that you do to your Windows operating system before you deploy them. You don't want to trust everyone to do that hardening manually by themselves. So what you can do is you can create a Windows VM in Azure or even on premises, wherever, put your own security hardening or any other software like maybe backup software, security and anti-ransomware, anti-malware, and all that stuff, load all of that on the image, capture that as a custom image for Azure, And then you can use something like an Azure policy to restrict and say whenever people want to deploy, they've got to use that image that you've verified or vetted for your own and for your own requirement, for your own particular organization requirement. So I'll show you how to do that manually, how to do that. It's a very straightforward process. But one thing, so I know some of you like are into DevOps and all of that. Anybody familiar with a tool called Packer?
Yeah, I've read about it. I've not actually used it.
Yeah, so I'll give you a lab that is very good. Implementing custom Azure VM images. And it goes through a lab of using HashiCorp Packer. It's a very nice lab to do because what this does is it can automate the process of building a custom image. That's what Packer can do. So you define what the image is, you define the customization as code, and then you pass it through the Packer and tell Packer, I want you to output this image as an Azure image. You can say, I want you to output this image as an AWS image, as a Google Cloud image, as a VMware image, as an Hyper-V image, whatever version that you want, even as a VirtualBox image. Packer will build the image in an automated way and output it in whatever version that you want it to output it to. So this is a very nice lab that I'll put in the chat window. If you want to be familiar with that, it's a very nice lab to do. You get to use Packer to automate the building of images. So what I'll do is, to make things very quick, I will start the process of deploying a Windows machine, and then I will talk about the rest, and then I'll come back to the other provisioning. So let's put this in resource group 1, that's fine. I'll call this um, web server 01 UK South, and let's go, no, let's leave that, the image. Actually, before I do that, before I come to talk about the custom image, I hope that is clear, right? I'll come to talk about the custom image. I want to talk about the other decisions first. So number one key decision that you have to make is the image that you're going to be used. You have three options: Microsoft provided images, third-party provided images, or your own images. You take your pick or whatever, and then whatever pick you decide determines the amount that you're going to be charged by Microsoft and whatever option you select. Okay, so that's with the images. Key decision number two that you need to be aware of when for VM deployment in Azure is the VM type. Talk about the VM type. I'll show you because that's exactly the spot where I am in my deployment, the VM type. And if I go back to the Azure portal, I have this, so you can call it VM type or VM size, whatever option that you want to use. So VM size or VM type. You can change or select the VM type. Say, yeah, I get it, David. I'm just selecting the VM type. What impact does that have? The VM type or the VM size that you select affects everything. It affects everything. Say, what exactly does it mean by it affects everything? Now, let me give you a list of what VM type affects. So let's go get this. Oh, come on, Azure. Let's go get this. Okay. Here's a list of whatever option that you select. Here's a list of what it affects. There you go. So whatever you select for your VM size or type, of course, it has an impact on the amount of CPU and the amount of RAM that you have, but it also determines the hardware that you run on. There are different hardware types in Azure. One of the things that you'll have noticed when I'm deploying this is you notice that there's some virtual machine sizes that have V3 in front of them. Some have V2 in front of them. You notice some don't even have anything in front of them. If I cancel all of the default filtering that's taking place and just let it give me like a full list of all the possible options, you notice that some have a V2, some don't have a V, some have V3 in front of them, and on and on and on. What the V is standing for is it stands for the generation of the hardware. Azure, like any other data centers, they bring in new hardware. And new hardware usually comes with better power and all of that stuff. So that's what that V is referring to. Whatever option that you select over here, if you select V3, that means you're running on kind of like the latest version of the hardware. You select the V2, you're kind of running on a backward version hardware. You select V1, you're probably running on the first generation type hardware in Azure. So whatever you select for your VM size determine the hardware that you run on, V1, V2, or V3. You take your pick. The main thing between this for you to know is that usually if you go to the higher version of in terms of hardware, the cost is cheaper. That's Microsoft's way to encourage you to move to a higher version. So I'll give you a quick illustration. If I show you like a D2 SV3, that's going to cost 115.34 in a month. It has two CPUs and 8 gigs of RAM. If I show you a D2S V2, which is the V2 equivalent of this one, let's see how much that's going to cost. This one is going to cost 115, right? Let's see what D2S V2 will cost, or DS2 V2. Gonna get there somewhere. Oh, here we go. There it is. And look at that. DS2 V2 actually has the same number of CPU, has less RAM because V3 has 8 gigs of RAM, but it's actually going to cost me more. That one is going to cost me 115. This one is going to cost me 163. So when it comes to cost, try as much as possible to select the higher version in terms of hardware, because that's going to reduce your cost a lot. That's a way to give you the motivation. So when they come out with version 4, most likely that will have a lower cost, and then you're going to be encouraged to move quickly to that, right? Because you can save yourself a bunch of money rather than doing the other ones. It affects.
David,
Yeah.
can you after you create?
Oh, sorry. Your voice cut off. I'm not sure what happened.
Sorry, that was me. When you create the VM
Yeah.
and you've got it in V2, for example, but they bring out a new version,
Yeah.
have they built tools to easily move it up to V3?
Yes. Yes. So you can move across to V3. You can move across the different sizes. For majority of the situations, you can move across without issues. Of course, it's going to require a restart because it's going to have to move your VM to another one, to another hardware and all of that. But you can move across if you wanted to.
Okay.
Yeah. For
I thought I'd ask that because cost is a big
yeah, exactly.
big
Yeah.
ticket. Yeah.
And that's the thing. That I think that's a very nice strategy by Microsoft to do that. Because what that means is, because otherwise, like, we're IT professionals, we don't want to be, why I've got so many projects to do, so many tasks to do. Why will I be motivated to be moving to new hardware, right? This is a good way to motivate you. Move to a new hardware, you can save yourself. Like in that case, you could save yourself about £40 a month. And if you have like 1,000 machine, that adds up a lot. So you're like, yeah, we got to get that done. Let's save ourselves this money and all of that. So that's for that. So it also determines the disk that can be used. The VM size that you select determines the disk that can be used. One of the things that you may have noticed is that again, some of them has S in their names, while you notice that some do not have S in their names. You notice this does not have a S, this one has a S. This one does not have a S. This one has a S. So what's the difference? This one looks exactly the same as this one. This one is D8V3. This one is D8SV3. And if you look at everything else, CPU is exactly the same. RAM is exactly the same. Data disk is exactly the same until you get to IOPS, where you notice the IOPS of this one versus the IOPS of this one, right? And then you see the difference. So here's the thing is that the S stands for SSD. It means that this virtual machine that has the S can support an SSD, while this one can only support the magnetic disk. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So that's what that means. It also determines,
Someone needs to mute their microphone. There's a lot of background noise going on.
yeah, there is. Great. Thank you. Thanks for that. So it also determines the number of data disks that you can add. So again, if I go back to what I was showing you, you can have a look at the data disk. You notice if you select this, you can add 8 data disks to this machine. If you select this one, you can add 16 data disks to this machine. Usually, if you select the larger the size of the virtual machine that you select, the larger the number of data disks that you can add to that. But all that is determined by the size or the type that you select. What else does it affect? It affects the number of network interfaces that you can get. It affects the bandwidth that you get or expected throughput that you get. So whatever you select for VM size and VM type affect a lot of things. So if I go over here and if I go under general purpose, and if you have a look at the different lists that they have over here, you notice right in front there's something that says um, maximum network interface card and expected network bandwidth in megabit per second. So this particular VM size, you can go up to an expected network bandwidth of 1 gig. For this other one, you can go on to an expected bandwidth of 2 gigs, of 4 gigs, of 8 gigs, and on and on and on. And when it comes to the expected network bandwidth, one of the things to note is that it is not per network interface. This is per virtual machine. So this 1 gig, if you have 2 network interfaces, this 1 gig is split across the 2 network interfaces. If you had 8 network interfaces on this 1 gig is split across 8, this 8 gig is split across the 8 network interfaces. If you had 16 gig with this one and you have 8 network interfaces, the 16 gig is split across them. And you find that information if you scroll down where it says expected network bandwidth is the maximum aggregated bandwidth allocated by virtual machine across all network interfaces for all destinations. So, does that make sense to you, right? So, because I want us to move on very quickly. So,
Yep.
So two key decisions that we've talked
Yep.
about. We've talked about the image and then the VM type. So what I'll do is I'll just run through a quick demo of capturing a custom image. I'll deploy an extension and then let's do that very quickly. So if I go back to my Azure portal over here and I complete the process, I select the D2S Victory for my virtual machine, give it a username and a password. Specify the ports that I want to allow. I do have that. I can go next. So disks, we can have premium SSD, standard SSD, or standard HDD. We'll talk about that later. So go on the networking, and yeah, that's all good. Go on to I'll just switch this off, and I'll switch this to no, and go next. So advanced, so one of the things I can add is I can add an extension to install. I'll talk about this in a minute after you do your lab. So the extension, what we're doing with the extension is you can pass a script to the virtual machine. For example, to say deploy this script once you've completed deploying this virtual machine. So it could be in case of Windows, it could be a PowerShell script. So you can pass a script to Azure to say, once you've deployed this machine, run the script on the virtual machine to configure it. So it could be just a simple PowerShell script. It could be a PowerShell DSC script. So Azure will handle the whole compilation. So it's going to compile it, get the MAR file, and it's going to deploy that. So it could be a PowerShell DSC script. So in this case, I'm just going to use a plain PowerShell script. So add an extension. An extension could also be, an agent. So maybe like a backup agent, an anti-malware agent, or whatever. If whatever anti-malware that you use, if the agent is not here, again, you can use custom script to pass a script or PowerShell disaster configuration script to pass a DSC config to the VM to execute after deployment. So I'll go ahead and select custom script extension and I'll go create that. So what I'm saying is I want this machine over here. Let's go back. Let's go to my environment where let's go. Yep, excellent. So I have a simple script that just installs IIS over here. So it's a simple PowerShell script. So I'm gonna pass this PowerShell script to this machine and I'm gonna click OK. So essentially what I'm saying is deploy this machine with all the configuration that I've selected, and when you're done deploying the machine, execute this script to install IIS on it. So I don't have to do that manually. So that's going to kick off that whole process of deploying that. So I'll pause here because I think I've talked for a long time.